just ag, it's also energy, it's finance. In agriculture, farmers use derivatives to lock in prices for their crops, protecting themselves against unpredictable weather and market fluctuations. In the energy sector, companies use derivatives to stabilize prices for oil, gas, and electricity. That enables steady planning and operation. In finance, derivatives help manage interest rate risk, currency fluctuations, and credit exposure, and that contributes to the overall stability of global markets. The U.S. futures and swaps markets are the largest, most liquid markets in the world, and that is not an accident. That is in no small part because of the responsible regulation of the Commodities Future Trading Commission. Each day, the Commission works to ensure the integrity, the vibrancy, and the resiliency of the derivatives markets. And in doing so, it protects those people we've been talking about, the farmers, the ranchers, the manufacturers, and other end users who rely on these markets for robust risk management tools. Today, we're going to hear from stakeholders who will provide diverse perspectives on the importance of reauthorizing the Commission, and hopefully they'll give us a little insight into the issues and priorities that we should consider during this process. This past March, CFTC Chair Benham testified before the committee, and the ranking member asked him about the importance of reauthorization. Chair Benham put it well, as he often does, when he said this: We have to reauthorize the agency to ensure the public and our international partners understand that Congress and this committee take derivatives markets and America's supremacy in derivatives markets very seriously. We have the biggest markets in the world, and I think we all want to keep it that way. And reauthorization is one step to ensure that condition remains the same. I couldn't agree more. It's our role as authorizers to continue to examine the work of the Commission and the needs of market users. Reauthorization is how we fill the role. That's how we ripen these conversations. Just as this committee successfully passed digital asset market structure legislation in a bipartisan manner, both in the committee and on the House floor, it's my goal to achieve the same bipartisan success with the reauthorization of the CFTC. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to the conversation that'll flow after that. And without any further ado, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for her opening remarks.
Well, thank you, Chairman Johnson, for working together to convene this timely and important hearing. After examining the challenging question of oversight of digital assets, I'm pleased that the subcommittee is turning to the matter of reauthorizing the agency we have chosen to empower with such oversight, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. For almost 50 years, the CFTC has been the cop on the beat in protecting the integrity of our futures markets and the important price discovery and risk management functions they serve. In 2010, in the wake of the financial crisis, Congress empowered the agency to oversee the multi-trillion-dollar swaps market and ease the market's transition from an unregulated environment into a more transparent and financially secure market. Through the years, our markets have shown themselves to be remarkably resilient amongst global volatility, from international conflicts to extreme weather events to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this agency with such important responsibilities has not been reauthorized for more than 2 decades. For today's hearing, we will hear from a distinguished panel of stakeholders about the importance of the CFTC and the markets it oversees, and what Congress should consider when reauthorizing the agency. Thank you, witnesses, for being here this early morning to share your testimony. I look forward to hearing from all of you. As ranking member of the subcommittee, I'm particularly interested in how we maintain strong customer protections in our financial markets while we pursue reauthorization, especially for the retail investor. While our nation's financial markets are vibrant, innovative, and amongst the strongest in the world, they will only remain that way if the users of these markets have confidence in the customer protections in place in these agencies, like the CFTC, that enforce those protections. Additionally, as we consider these discussions regarding an agency whose oversight authority we're looking to expand to the digital assets marketplace, we must make sure we're not shortchanging the CFTC in our appropriations process. The current agricultural appropriations proposal includes a cut of $20 million to the agency's budget. Today, we will hear about the importance of this agency, and I hope it will resonate that such a cut will negatively impact the agency's ability to police its derivative markets. Again, I welcome our witnesses here who are here today and look forward to listening to your testimony. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Now we turn to the legend of Howard, Pennsylvania, the chair of the full committee, G.T. Thompson.
Okay, well, maybe I should just yield back at this point. It's the nicest thing anybody said about me in a long time. Now, hey, good morning, everybody, and thank you to Chairman Johnson and Ranking Member Caraveo for convening this subcommittee hearing. I would like to echo Chairman Johnson's sentiments and extend my thanks to everyone for joining us today. The U.S. derivatives markets are essential to our economy. They allow businesses, both large and small, to manage the risks associated with price fluctuations for their inputs and outputs. Derivatives enable businesses to focus on their core activities without being unduly concerned with ever-changing commodity prices. The CFTC, which, by the way, is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year as an independent agency, serves a critical function in regulating derivative markets both domestically and internationally. The Commission safeguards market participants from fraud, manipulation, and abusive practices, while also promoting financial innovation and fair competition. Earlier this week, a bipartisan group of House Agriculture Committee members visited the CFTC's D.C. headquarters. We had a terrific visit with the CFTC chairman, the commissioners, and agency staff to gain a deeper understanding of how the Commission operates and the pressing issues that it faces. The agency's authorization expired more than a decade ago, making it crucial that we address reauthorization now. This process is not merely a bureaucratic formality, it is a reaffirmation of our commitment to a robust regulatory oversight. It ensures that CFTC has the necessary tools and resources to adapt to the evolving financial landscape. With technological advancements like artificial intelligence and the rise of new financial products like digital assets, the CFTC's role is more critical than ever. Further reauthorization of the CFTC reinforces the global leadership of the United States in financial regulation. It sends a strong message that we are committed to maintaining high standards in our markets, protecting investors, and fostering innovation. And that's why Ranking Member Scott and I have both publicly called for the CFTC to be reauthorized this Congress. Now, I look forward to hearing our witnesses' testimony and remain committed to working towards a successful bipartisan CFTC reauthorization. Together, we can ensure the CFTC remains a cornerstone of integrity and stability in our financial system. With that, I thank you, and I yield back.
The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so the witnesses may begin their testimony, and to ensure there's ample time for questions. Dr. Caraveo and I will be running this hearing together, and with that in mind, she will introduce our witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our first witness today is Mr. Walter Lucan, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Futures Industry Association. Our next witness is Thomas Sexton, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Futures Association. Our third witness will be Mr. Travis Antonsen, who is Senior Vice President for Grain Marketing and Logistics for the Agterra Cooperative. And our fourth and final witness today is Ms. Alexandra Thornton, who is the Senior Director for Financial Regulation at the Center for American Progress. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Impressive witnesses all. You all get the situation. You've got 5 minutes. The timer in front of you will count down, and when you get to red, you'll get gavelled down by either Dr. Caraveo or myself. With that, Mr. Lucan, please begin when you're ready.
Chair Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to come today and testify on reauthorization. Mr. Chairman, I disagree. I believe derivatives regulation is sexy. At least I've been trying to convince my family that for many years. So hopefully by the end of my testimony, I'll have you on my side. I am the President and CEO of FIA, which represents futures, options, and centrally cleared derivatives markets globally. FIA strongly supports the reauthorization of this important agency. As former acting chair of the CFTC, I believe reauthorization serves as an exercise in good government and provides a congressional stamp of approval of the CFTC's important mission. Today, I want to highlight some of the trends that are happening in our markets that will benefit from your deliberations on reauthorization. First, our markets have grown significantly. Total trading volume on CFTC-regulated exchanges in the U.S. has doubled since 2008, the last time that this committee reauthorized the CFTC. Second, post-crisis reforms have brought more derivatives products under the CFTC's regulation, while at the same time making the derivatives markets safer and our financial system safer. Third, our markets have demonstrated tremendous resilience and strength in the face of recent volatility. Our markets have remained stable and working throughout recent stress events, including COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, the Silicon Valley Bank failure, and even high inflation. One reason for this resilience is the CFTC's principles-based regulatory regime enacted by this very committee. This regulatory framework has enabled a flexible oversight tools for the CFTC to keep pace with evolving trends and technological advancements. Now, this adaptability has reduced the need for wholesale changes of the CFTC's statutory authority over time. That said, while the CFTC has this flexibility that has proven effective, the need for this committee's oversight remains as important as ever. There are certain trends for this committee's oversight that are worth noting today. For example, as the American public becomes more accepting of new products like cryptocurrencies, digital asset platforms bring novel market structures into the traditional futures industry. Increasingly, we are seeing more exchanges, clearinghouses, clearing brokers, and trading firms under one legal entity. FIA has serious concerns that collapsing the existing multi-tiered ecosystem with its independent checks and balances could undo valuable customer protections of the listed derivatives markets. FIA welcomes Chairman Benham's comments that the agency plans to propose a new rule to address these potential conflicts. A second topic worth noting is the pending U.S. bank capital proposals that would dramatically increase the amount of capital held by U.S. banks for client clearing, those folks that access customers in our markets. Without changes to the proposals, the cost of hedging in our markets will likely increase for all end users, including production agriculture. Our industry appreciates this committee's leadership in voicing concerns about the impact of these rules. The last item is the SEC's Treasury clearing mandate taking effect over the next 2 years. The cleared derivatives markets are heavy users of Treasury securities and the repo markets in the funding, margining, and collateralization of futures trades. This committee will play a critical role in ensuring that there are no impediments to customers accessing these markets or overlapping jurisdictional issues between the CFTC and SEC with these mandates. Now, turning to reauthorization, FIA believes the existing CFTC regulatory framework has served as a source of strength for our markets. I believe an appropriate approach would be a simple and straightforward reauthorization bill, one that provides the congressional stamp of approval of this agency's important mission and legal authority. That said, there are 3 minor adjustments to the Act I would raise for your consideration. First, FIA joins the NFA in supporting a non-controversial legislative fix to resolve legal uncertainty around FCM bankruptcies in the definition of customer property. Second, FIA supports expanding the way the CFTC might leverage funding for educating farmers about our markets, including the risks and opportunities of derivatives. And finally, FIA supports legislative efforts to provide flexibility for research and development capabilities of the CFTC in partnering with private sector, such as those led by Representative Austin Scott. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you all for allowing me to testify on CFTC reauthorization, and I look forward to your questions.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Sexton, you are up.
Good morning, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity for National Futures Association to appear at this hearing on the important topic of the CFTC's reauthorization. I am the President and CEO of NFA. NFA is a registered futures association under the Commodity Exchange Act and the industry-wide independent self-regulatory organization for the derivatives industry. Our overriding objective is to partner with and help the CFTC regulate the derivatives markets. Our main areas of responsibility are described in my written testimony. The CFTC oversees each and every aspect of NFA's regulatory authority. Our coordination efforts with the CFTC over the years, in part, have built a strong track record of protecting retail customers and prosecuting retail trading abuses and fraud. At this time, I want to thank Chair Benham for his leadership of the CFTC and thank him and the CFTC's other commissioners for their support of NFA and for their willingness to work with us to resolve the industry's regulatory issues. Reauthorization is always an important process for the industry as a whole and for NFA in particular. NFA firmly believes that customer protection issues should be front and center as Congress works to reauthorize the CFTC. Today, I'd like to cover one significant reauthorization topic, strengthening FCM customer protections in bankruptcy. The 2019 reauthorization bill voted out of the House Agriculture Committee included a key customer protection provision relating to FCM bankruptcies, which we continue to strongly support and believe any future reauthorization bill should address. Over 40 years ago, the CFTC adopted rules regarding FCM bankruptcies. Among other things, those rules provided that if there is a shortfall in customer segregated funds, the term customer funds would include all assets of the FCM until customers have been made whole. Several years ago, a district court decision cast doubt on the validity of the CFTC's authority to adopt this rule. Although that decision was subsequently vacated, a cloud of uncertainty continues to remain over this rule's efficacy. Congress should remove that doubt and ensure that customers have priority if there is a shortfall in segregated funds. Congress can do so by amending Section 20 of the Commodity Exchange Act, which gives the CFTC authority to adopt regulations regarding commodity brokers that are debtors under Chapter 7 of the United States Bankruptcy Code to make clear that the CFTC has the authority to adopt the rule that it did. We believe there is broad industry support for this approach. Let me turn to digital asset commodities for just a few minutes. In 1982, Congress and the CFTC gave NFA the authority or responsibility to regulate firms engaging in exchange-traded derivatives. We are appreciative that over the years, Congress and the CFTC have entrusted us with additional regulatory responsibilities over retail forex and swaps. The Commission's responsibilities are enormous, and we will continue to help it in any way we can. The CFTC has led efforts among financial regulators to protect customers by tackling fraudulent schemes associated with retail digital asset commodities activities. We applaud this subcommittee and, under Chairman Thompson's leadership, the House Committee on Agriculture's collaborative work with the House Financial Services Committee to pass legislation governing spot digital assets, including those that are commodities. As this subcommittee is aware, the FIT Act includes a significant role for an RFA in regulating the digital asset commodity market. I would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm NFA's willingness to assist the CFTC to the extent requested in developing an appropriate regulatory framework for the digital asset commodity market if Congress moves forward with legislation in this area. Our member firms have engaged in spot digital asset commodity activities for over 5 years, and we have taken steps to regulate these members' activities to ensure that appropriate customer protections are in place. We are fully capable of working with the CFTC to perform the responsibilities of an RFA as outlined in the FIT Act, and will continue to take a pragmatic regulatory approach with regard to this area. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss CFTC reauthorization. I would be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, and we'll go to Mr. Antonsen next.
Good morning, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing as you work on reauthorization of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the role of derivatives markets CFTC oversees in helping farmers and agribusiness manage commodity price risks. I currently work for AgTegra, a cooperative owned by 6,700 farmers in the Dakotas. I'm also actively engaged in my family farming operation. Currently, some of our agricultural markets are seeing lower price levels driven by increased international crop production. Mostly favorable weather this year is aiding in crop development, and futures contracts are currently pricing in expectations for another large harvest. For example, the futures price on the December 24 corn contract topped out at $6.02 a bushel in April of 2022. Yesterday, that price closed at $4.18, so significant volatility in cash prices. Thus far, it appears producers who previously forward price contracts will likely receive higher prices. Our cooperative is active in offering those pricing tools that allow our members to manage their price risk well in advance of harvesting or even planting that crop. To manage such large commodity price risks and movements, we rely on highly functioning derivative markets. For example, AgTegra uses exchange-traded futures and options, OTC derivatives, over-the-counter contracts, to hedge our price risk for us to protect our grain in storage, manage our future sales, and offset energy and fertilizer risk. We also do this to offer forward contracting options to our member owners. In the process of buying grain from the farm to selling it to the end user exporter, that bushel of grain may have had to trade futures 4 or 5 times by the time the grain reaches its final destination. The CFTC ensures the integrity of those markets. As the Agriculture Committee has looked to reauthorize the CFTC in the past, we have supported those efforts. Reauthorizing CFTC is how this committee acknowledges the importance of the agency's critical functions. While the CFTC's mission has expanded in recent years, we rely on the CFTC to ensure the soundness of our commodity markets. It's essential for the agriculture industry to have well-functioning commodity derivative markets, and the CFTC performs the essential role of helping to safeguard those markets. While the Commission's responsibilities have expanded, funding has been flat. While not in the scope of this committee, we encourage Congress to provide sufficient funding for CFTC's important functions. However, we caution against the imposition of any user fees on the industry to fund CFTC. Agriculture is a high-volume, low-margin industry. Incremental costs, whether passed on or imposed directly on the participants, eventually trickle down to the end users and farmers. Grain represented by underlying futures contracts can be traded multiple times, as I noted before. If there is a user fee, the net selling price received by the producer would go down by the amount of the fee each time the underlying futures contract is traded. We fear further increasing costs would have the unintended consequences of discouraging prudent hedging practices. To be clear, a user fee would increase risk being absorbed by agriculture. Additionally, we would caution Congress from setting up a situation where the CFTC would see its budget directly impacted by the volume of trading in the products it's tasked with regulating. I outlined several concerns we have with the Basel III Endgame proposals in my written testimony. We appreciate Congress's engagement on this issue and are hopeful that those capital requirements will be re-proposed. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify today before the committee. We appreciate your role in ensuring the industry will continue to be able to effectively hedge commercial risk in supporting the viability of our farmers. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
And finally, Ms. Thornton.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Caraveo, and esteemed members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The CFTC plays a central role in overseeing agricultural and other physical commodities markets which are essential to our economy, as well as overseeing the complex financial products known as swaps, which were at the heart of the 2007-2008 financial crisis. The Commission oversees dozens of entities where derivatives are traded, 10 organizations that clear those trades, and 5 more outside the U.S. It also oversees the registration and compliance of thousands of derivatives market participants and oversees self-regulatory organizations such as the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the National Futures Association. Yet the CFTC is critically underfunded and would remain so even if Congress were to grant all the funding that it has requested. The agency simply does not have adequate resources to fill its existing mission and statutory obligations. Because of this underfunding, many important protections and functions that should be performed by the Commission are not today, such as comprehensive review of designated contract market rule changes and products to ensure their compliance with the law and the core principles, and development and enforcement of detailed advertising performance and fee rules. And since the financial crisis, the markets overseen by the CFTC, of course, have become larger, faster, and more interconnected. The Commission's responsibilities are essential to maintaining the integrity, resilience, and vibrancy of our derivatives markets and ensure that these markets never again threaten the stability of our financial system or wreak havoc on our economy. The Commission should be reauthorized and adequately funded to carry out its existing responsibilities. This is a major reason why the agency's authorized activities should not be expanded into new areas, as proposed recently in connection with digital assets and voluntary carbon credits. We already know there is rampant fraud and abuse in the crypto industry. Protecting retail investors, consumers, from this fraud and abuse should be the guiding principle of any new special digital asset regulatory regime. Yet the CFTC and its self-regulatory organization currently lack comprehensive marketing and sales practice rules like those of FINRA and the SEC, because the agency has never had to protect retail and has seldom had to protect retail investors from the information asymmetries they confront in financial transactions. In addition, digital assets are promoted by market intermediaries that are often acting in multiple conflicting roles. Most rules designed to reduce such conflicts of interest, along with rules that combat terrorism financing and money laundering, require transparency and accountability that the industry does not want, but are essential to investor protection. These are just two parts of the extensive regulatory framework that the Commission would have to develop in order to adequately protect retail investors in crypto. It would take years, this framework would take years to develop and absorb significant time and energy away from the agency's existing duties. And the rules developed could raise regulatory risk if challenged in court. Thus, a new CFTC regime for crypto could actually introduce more uncertainty around these assets rather than less. And it would also be extremely inefficient and costly to taxpayers and market participants to create a duplicate investor protection regime at the CFTC when there's a robust investor protection regime at the SEC that has been perfected continuously over 9 decades. A CFTC regime could incentivize players in the securities markets to restructure assets and deals to take advantage of a weaker CFTC regime, which could spread the risk to retail securities investors. Finally, a new CFTC regime would create a new veneer of legitimacy and safety, further confusing retail investors who are finally beginning to understand the risks of crypto. Any perceived gaps in the current federal financial regulatory framework as it applies to digital transactions could lead to larger gaps and greater risk to our capital markets. The CFTC also should not be authorized to take a wider role on voluntary carbon credit derivatives, as the agency's recent proposal might inspire. The underlying assets, the voluntary carbon credits themselves, cannot readily be traded in a manner that is consistent with the core principles, primarily because a material percentage of the underlying projects that purportedly give rise to the credits simply do not generate the carbon savings claimed by those who market them. That is, the amount of carbon actually being removed and for how long is not sufficiently known to form a reliable market and is far beyond the agency's expertise to fix. Until the problems are fixed by other responsible public and private parties in a unified global system, voluntary carbon credit derivatives should not be listed or traded. Thank you again for inviting me to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions.
We'll now recognize members for questions. We'll begin with my favorite portrait from the South Wall, Mr. Frank Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing, and the witnesses for agreeing to testify. The CFTC regulates markets that impact nearly every part of the economy, and reauthorizing the Commission will give us an opportunity to provide meaningful oversight and give certainty to market participants. The derivatives market faces a number of potential stresses: the Basel Endgame, the GSIP surcharge, the Treasury market structure reform, along with substantial SEC rulemaking agenda that will decrease market liquidity and increase costs. In the context of CFTC reauthorization, it's worth considering the full regulatory environment that the markets are confronted with. So there's a lot to discuss. Starting with the Boswell proposal, an issue I've discussed with Chairman Benham, Secretary Yellen, Chairman Powell, and all of the prudential regulators. is the impact this will have on our capital markets, including reduced access to derivative products for end users and further concentrations of FCMs. It seems like the regulators would be open to a reproposal, but FDIC and OCC will have to join with the Fed on that decision. Mr. Lucan, you're no stranger to the Ag Committee room, so thank you for joining us today and touching on Basel during your testimony. Could you expand on why it's so important that the regulators reopen the proposal for public comment?
Well, Congressman Lucas, you have been a leader on this topic on capital, and this committee has been a leader to point out the obvious fact from the financial crisis, which that our markets and clearing and central counterparties actually mitigate risk. They reduce risk in the financial system. And so the capital is an important component of the financial reforms coming out of the financial crisis, that banks should hold more capital for risky activity. But they just have it wrong. I think the prudential regulators are overtaxing clearing activity to make it so that there's going to be a capacity issue, that banks are going to stop offering this service to hedgers. We heard Travis talk about this, that end users may have limited access to hedging vehicles to hedge volatility in commodity markets as a result of Basel capital. So our hope is that the prudential regulators are listening to the reasonable voices of CFTC Benham and others that have said, you have to get this right. It has to be proportional to the risk brought by our markets, and we're hopeful that that gets fixed in the coming months.
Mr. Sexton, you're a member of the CFTC's Global Markets Advisory Committee. One suggestion among many that GMAC had for the Commission last month was to hold a roundtable with the bank regulators focused on derivatives issues impacted by Basel. Could you explain broadly to the importance of stakeholder feedback on matters that will have a significant impact on the market?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Lucas. I certainly endorse the concept of GMAC and its recommendation to hold this roundtable to further determine the impact of these capital rules. As Mr. Lucan and Travis have indicated, this is extremely important to farmers and ranchers and end users and hedgers because of the consolidation that may occur among firms if these capital rules are put in place. So stakeholder impact comments are extremely important and something that we should be looking to do.
The CFTC's enforcement authority has been a closely watched issue during the past several years. Reauthorizing the CFTC gives us the opportunity to closely examine what the Commission is doing and identifying improvements that can be made. Mr. Lucan, back to you. Do you think the Commission's current cross-border authority is effective from a regulatory and enforcement perspective?
Well, I can only speak from my experience at the CFTC, but we were able to work closely with our regulatory authorities overseas to partner with them to make sure that they had the appropriate information. But the important thing is, does the CFTC have direct authority when there is a strong nexus to the United States? And I believe they do, that they have the ability to go after bad behavior overseas when it's a strong nexus to the United States. So I think the CFTC does have appropriate authority.
Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I'd simply note that I have spent much time screaming about the potential impacts of the Basel capital requirements on the American economy. This is one of those things that if we don't get it right, the damage that would be inflicted will be extremely difficult to address later. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
100% right. With that, we'll yield 5 minutes to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all once again for being here this morning as we consider this important reauthorization of the CFTC. Your testimony is invaluable. Now, the last attempt by the committee to reauthorize the CFTC included provisions to harmonize some of the enforcement authorities between the CFTC and the SEC. One provision would clarify the CFTC's authority to prosecute and fraud and manipulation outside of the United States, where such activities impair our futures markets, and another would establish a reckless standard for those who aid and abet fraudsters and manipulators of our markets, the same standard that currently applies to those who actually perpetrate the fraud or manipulation. For the whole panel, what are your thoughts on whether we need to harmonize such enforcement activities and whether these are appropriate? Thank you. Anyone who wants to answer. Go ahead, Mr.
I will just chime in. I agree with Tom that it's important for the CFTC to have clear authority to go after bad behavior overseas. I can't speak to the specifics of whether harmonizing with the SEC's enforcement authorities is the right approach. As I mentioned when I was chair, we had plenty of authority to go after actors. We did not feel impeded in any way of going after.
Mr. Lucan, is your mic on?
Pardon me, sorry. We did not have any impediments during my tenure for going after bad behavior overseas, or if we were able to share with foreign authorities. So we certainly support the premise, though, that it's important for the CFTC to have a robust authority to go after manipulative behavior overseas.
I would agree with both gentlemen.
Perfect. Thank you. Ms. Thornton?
We don't really have a strong opinion on that, but I'm really interested to learn more about it.
Perfect, thank you. Now, Mr. Lucan, your testimony raises concerns about conflicts of interest within vertically integrated structures, particularly futures commission merchants owned by exchanges and clearinghouse and embedded in their trading and legal structures. Can you speak more to these concerns and the impact of such structures on our financial systems? And then, Mr. Antonsen, if you could follow up as to whether your members have any concerns.
And we're seeing this more and more where through the efficiencies of a lot of these crypto platforms that they're combining both being an exchange, a clearinghouse, and an FCM into one legal entity. The problem is that exchanges and clearinghouses have self-regulatory authorities over FCMs. So in essence, you would be policing yourself and those authorities. We saw some of this, I think, and we raised concerns with the FTX application, where they had a registered, not registered, but a trading arm within their legal structure that were combining the exchange, the clearinghouse, and a trading arm within their legal structure. And that ultimately led to some of the issues we saw with their demise. So we think it's good for the CFTC to take a close look at this to see if there are conflicts of interests that need to be addressed, if there are governance challenges we need to implement as part of this. Are we needing to separate certain functions because of that dual role of self-regulatory agency over these authorities?
Could you repeat your question for me, just so I'm clear?
Just whether your members have any similar concerns around what Mr. Lucan just discussed.
No, I think having guardrails and the double checks in that, I think we would agree with that. You know, we use multiple FCMs at times. There's options to have FCMs that are not exchanges. So I would agree with Walt on that.
Okay. Thank you all again for your testimony, and I'll yield back the remainder of my time. And I'm pleased to turn it next to our esteemed Chairman Thompson for his questions.
I thank the gentlelady, and once again, to all of our participant panelists, thank you so much. Mr. Lucan, in your testimony, you mentioned serving as acting chairman of the CFTC during the last CFTC reauthorization in 2008. You also discussed the increasingly global nature of derivatives markets. Could you please elaborate on how the derivative markets have evolved since that time and address the importance of reauthorizing the CFTC as these markets evolve?
Well, certainly since that time, it's gotten much more global, since I was at the agency. I think the addition of over-the-counter derivatives has added challenges to the CFTC's legal authority. I shouldn't say challenges, but given them...
Sorry, Mr. Lucan, I don't think your mic is on. It is. Okay.
You want to use it?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can use mine.
I'm having some mic problems today, sorry. But no, I think the markets are definitely more global, they're larger, as I mentioned, but we're seeing that the framework has upheld very well, really since the Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000, which put in those flexible approaches. The CFTC is allowed to evolve itself with these market trends. So even though we're seeing more global volume, the CFTC has been able to keep pace with those changes. And that's why I think many of us, if not all of us on this dais, are saying that there doesn't need to be a huge overhaul of the act, that it's actually kept pace with the big global growth.
Yeah, those core principles really have sort of made it resilient and adaptable to as things have evolved. So, Mr. Sexton, could you please share with us your perspectives on this question?
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, and certainly I wholeheartedly agree with Walt that this is a very important process. It is great that this committee is seeking stakeholder interest in this process. This is a process that is obviously provided for by Congress to have this reauthorization process. The act has stood up well. We have the one recommendation with regard to Griffin. And I agree that with Chair Benham and the others' testimony today that reauthorization signals the importance of our regulatory structure here to the global derivatives markets, and it gives that acknowledgement of the CFTC's critical role in that market. So I think it's very important to reauthorize the CFTC.
Well, thank you. I think reauthorization also reflects our responsibility to do our job.
Yes.
And to make sure that we can, that we should have done it before. So we look forward to accomplishing it here, even with just the remaining days we have in 118th. Mr. Atkinson, in your testimony, you mentioned your concerns regarding the negative potential impacts of Basel III endgame rules may have on the derivatives markets and the end users that rely on them. Could you please share with us some of those negative potential impacts?
I think, when the information first came out, speculation was that we're going to lose many FCMs due to the regulations. From our standpoint, we've seen FCMs get out of the business in the last 5 years. Many of them have. We've seen consolidation in the industry, and that as a user of that, again, I mentioned we use multiple FCMs, to limit our resources and limit our options on who we can use. If one of those goes away, we look at potentially higher hedging costs, less people to do business with.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Lucan, are your members concerned about the impact of these proposals on end users and other market participants?
This is one of our top concerns as an industry. I think rarely does our industry all get on the same page on a topic, but from end users to FCMs to exchanges to clearinghouses, this is going to limit the capacity of people to hedge in our markets. And so, as Travis mentioned, we have seen shrinking number of FCMs, those people that access production agriculture, allow them access to our markets. And if we lose more of those folks, it's gonna make the framework of our system less safe. And so we think this is incredibly important to get this right, give capacity to FCMs to get more access to more farmers, more commercial end users in this marketplace. This is a no-brainer. Hopefully the prudential regulators figure this out and fix these proposals.
Am I correct in saying that, the root cause of this would be increase in costs, but it would result in more systemic impacts, as you described, on the derivatives market?
Yeah, you're going to see less FCMs, and as a result,
Yeah.
you're going to see more concentration in firms. So we want as broad of a system, it's like insurance, you want as broad of a system of FCMs out there so that there are healthy FCMs across the board, and so that Travis has lots of choices of where he can bring his business.
Very good, thank you very much.
Thank you, and we'll go next to my colleague from California, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think it's appropriate that we get together this morning and discuss the future of the CFTC. And I wanted to focus to begin with the question that's been raised, I guess Mr. Lucan, you might be the first to respond, or Mr. Sexton, about the underfunding. There was a discussion earlier in the reauthorization effort that would allow you to charge fees to register companies to raise resources for the new level of oversight. The committee, I understand, as was noted in the opening comment by my colleague, cut it by $20 million from the current budget. When we consider the reauthorization of the commission and discuss expansion of the authorities, what do you think we need to do to ensure that the CFTC is appropriately funded regulator?
Well, FI supports the full and appropriate funding of the CFTC. When I was acting chairman of the CFTC, it was important for us to talk to the appropriators about why our markets matter. And so I think for us, we do have concerns with user fees in that it would cause less hedging. As I mentioned about capital, it's the same issue, that if you're directly taxing hedging capabilities, that's problematic for farmers.
So the user fees then versus the reduction of the $20 million is the trade-off, and you think it's...
No, I think appropriators should find ways to appropriately fund the CFTC, and to as they, they have lots of trade-offs they have to think about because it is taxpayer dollars. But we think the case should be made and is made that the CFTC should be appropriately funded.
Yeah. Mr. Sexton, do you think the agency's lack of reauthorization, since, and this is our fault, as the chairman noted, our responsibility, I guess I would say, since 2008 could impact your current funding challenges?
Could impact NFA's funding challenges, is that the question?
Yes.
So we are funded in two significant ways. And I look at our two major regulatory programs. Our overall budget is about $140 million to assist the CFTC in the work that it does, regulating the markets. Our swaps regulatory program, our swap dealers, is wholly funded by the swap dealer industry, by those dealers. And that is about $47 or so million through membership dues paid to NFA.
Self-funded?
Self-funded, yes.
Yeah.
The other component, our futures, is funded in part by membership dues, but the large proportion of that funding program, at about $82 million, is from what we call an assessment fee. We place a very small fee on what we call public trading volume, which is about 25%.
Mr. Sexton, your mic isn't working. We're being told it's not broadcasting. So if you could share a mic or grab a mic with...
Sure.
that'd be
I don't
great.
know.
Thank you.
I don't know if I want yours, though. I don't know. Let me see what I can do here. So, futures assessment fee, I'm sorry, is on a very small proportion, 25%, about a quarter of contract market volume. That's public volume, and that's at 4 cents a round turn. So it's a very small amount with regard to that fee.
So if the financial innovation technology for the 21st century, the FIT 21, were to become law, how much additional resources would the NFA need to effectively tackle these additional responsibilities in a new market?
That's a great question. We would, that's going to be dependent on how many new member firms we have and what our oversight regulatory responsibilities are. Each of our regulatory programs needs to self-fund, however, and so we will find a way with regard to our new members to get a revenue source in order to pay for what we need.
Ms. Thornton, you talked about crypto fraud in your comments. How extensive do you describe it today, and what do you think we need to do about it?
I think it's quite substantial, and I think that's something that really needs to be focused on is the use of arbitrage, because these spot markets in tokens, non-crypto asset, in tokens, are actually they have different streams, different data streams. And what that means is that when you buy a token, if you're a consumer and a retail investor and you buy a token, you get offered a price but you may not know what prices are being offered on
So
the
how do
other
we protect
platforms.
against that fraud?
I'm sorry?
How do we protect against that fraud?
Well, basically, the SEC does that by requiring a national market system. It actually was started in 1975. Congress authorized it in 1975. The idea that the different securities platforms would have to submit data so that a broker would know what the prices are that are being offered for that same security across the different exchanges, and would be able, and then also was given a fiduciary duty of best execution, so that they would have to execute the trade, picking the best price for the customer. But that doesn't exist at all with respect to crypto platforms.
Well, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member, my time's expired, but I think this is something that we need to look at greater depth. And when Mr. Lucan made his comment about prudence and overcapitalization, I'm very curious about how he measures prudence, or is that in the eye of the beholder? And then how do you measure the risk? But thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Gentleman's time is expired. We'll go next to Mr. Miller of Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank the chair and the ranking member and the witnesses for being here this morning. American agriculture utilizes a range of tools to manage risks. They employ vital on-farm strategies and federal farm bill programs, including risk management, commodity support programs, crop and livestock insurance, and disaster assistance prove critical in today's volatile marketplace. Our farm sector and other industries can also access vital measures such as futures, options, and marketing contract to manage risk from product and input price fluctuations. In the modern world, with input and production costs soaring and tight commodity prices, it is crucial to control the variables we're able through commodity derivative markets. In the last years, conditions globally and other instabilities have led to exceptionally large price volatility in many commodity markets, underscoring the role of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. To any of the witnesses, commodities derivatives markets are essential to help manage price risk and hedge exposures, as these vital tools assist agriculture producers in hedging exposure to rising input costs, severe weather incidents, and volatile prices in fuel, fertilizer, and other essentials. Could the witnesses elaborate on the importance of derivatives products to your operations and to those of your end users? And just really quick also, if a bad actor in the derivatives industry is causing significant harm or allowing for illegal and unregulated activity to take place, does the CFTC have the ability and resources to swiftly address and prevent harm from occurring through effective enforcement?
I can address your first part of that question. Derivatives, futures, options, over-the-counter contracts are paramount in what we do every day at AgTegra for both ourselves and for our cooperative members. So purchasing grain, hedging grain, storing grain, getting all the way through the system, it's probably the most important thing we do from a cooperative and managing risk. You mentioned volatility, whether it's weather, global markets, global geopolitical events. The volatility is through the roof. And as farm margins are tightening down, it's more important than ever to have the right tools in place and available, and also to use them with everything else that a producer has to use, right? Crop insurance, how you multi-layer those risk programs in there to make that happen. So, we utilize those every single day, and we rely on a healthy marketplace to get in and out of those efficiently.
Thank you for that answer. Can anyone address the second part of that question? And I can just say it again. If a bad actor in the derivatives industry is causing significant harm, does the CFTC have the ability and resources to swiftly address it, prevent harm from occurring through effective enforcement?
Congressman, certainly we are all, as regulators, worried about bad actors and the impact it can have. I can tell you that NFA works very closely with the CFTC's Division of Enforcement to ensure that we find those bad actors, punish those bad actors. To the extent that we closely coordinate with them, we have quarterly meetings with that division. So as far as the partnership between NFA and the CFTC, we are very focused on bad actors, and I can't say enough about the Division of Enforcement and its dedication to doing so.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Second question, given the importance of the United States agricultural production and the magnitude of U.S. exports of agricultural products to global consumers, America's farmers and global end users are not strangers to market volatility. Can any of you please elaborate on means to withstand these global uncertainties in the commodities market and tools for agricultural producers, energy users, and others to deal with such instability?
I would say, from the worldwide standpoint, the volatility is. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So just get right to it. Can you elaborate on the means to withstand global uncertainties in the commodity markets and the tools for agricultural producers, energy users, and others to deal with the instability that we're currently seeing?
Yeah, I'm sorry. And we see, the days when a producer wants to sell is not the same time that an end user wants to buy. We have huge gaps in volatility, and derivatives get us across that line. The volatility we've seen with weather, our export markets come and go, and being in South Dakota, we export most of our production. We're relying on getting it at least out of the state, and most of that goes to the world market. We get to that point, and yeah, that's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think if we can continue, I'm out of time, Chairman, but we can continue to hold people accountable for agreeing to, say, the USMCA, but taking advantage of us with GMO corn and actually bring them to a dispute panel probably would help out as well for a little bit. Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and we will go next to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having this hearing. Thanks for the panel for being here this morning. Very important topic. We've got to make sure that we get it right, and it impacts not just, folks all over the country, but certainly my ag producers throughout Kansas as well that rely on markets to make sure that they're managing the risks that are just ever present and continue to increase in agriculture. First question for you, Mr. Lucan. I want to circle back to enforcement for a moment and drill in on CFTC's existing authorities. Do you see any current gaps in the Commission's authorities to address overseas fraud that affects markets here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any current impediments for the CFTC going after bad behavior overseas that have, again, a nexus on American participants or citizens. I know when I was acting chairman of the agency, there were times when we needed to use prosecutorial discretion on whether we went after activity overseas. But if there was a strong nexus to American consumers, of course we would take strong interest, and the CFTC would go after that. And we brought several cases on the international front on that case, on that basis. But we oftentimes would work in partnership. It's one of those things, and we were talking about appropriate funds. The CFTC should not be the police force of the world for all activity. It really has to come back to whether there is a U.S. interest in that, and I don't think they have a lack of authority in that area.
Great, thank you. Next question for you, Mr. Sexton. In your testimony, you described a court opinion that called into question how customer property is defined by the Commodities Exchange Act, CEA, relative to the U.S. Bankruptcy Code. Could you please share with us some additional background on that issue and why it's potentially problematic for customers?
I certainly can, and this is in the context of FCM bankruptcies, which are rare, thank God. And the importance of the proposal with regard to reauthorization that we are making is that in the Griffin trading case, the one that I am referencing, there was a hole in customer segregated funds caused by a rogue trader many years ago. And obviously the firm did not have sufficient funds to make customers whole at that point in time. And the issue was whether or not customers would step in front of the firm's general creditors in the bankruptcy in order to get whatever funds existed from the company to go into seg funds in order to make customers whole. Very important with regard to customer protections in our view. And the court in that case, the district court, essentially said that the CFTC has a rule that would say, yes, customers can step in front of the general creditors. They called into question the CFTC's legal authority with regard to making that rule in the context of some provisions of the bankruptcy code. So what we're asking for is just that cloud of uncertainty be removed, and extremely important from a customer funds safeguard perspective, we believe.
Okay, thank you. Next question, back to you, Mr. Lucan. In your testimony, you discussed the globalization of our derivatives markets. How important is it for global regulators to be able to coordinate and share information with one another as they surveil and regulate these markets?
It's incredibly important. Information is really the currency for the regulatory authorities around the world. And so the CFTC, by statutory grant from this committee, has the ability to get a lot of information from our markets, what they call large trader reports. This ensures that they can see sizable positions in our markets to prevent manipulation, to see trends in the markets. And so it's important. It's important that they are able to share that information globally, as long as it's for an enforcement. It's not just a information grab, but it's for an enforcement purpose, and that happens quite frequently.
In your mind, would detailing staff to and from foreign regulators, the EU or the UK, support the global sharing of knowledge and experience?
Yes, that would be helpful. I think I sent details from the CFTC over to the UK when I was chair. We benefited from that because during the crisis, we were able to utilize those folks to help with what were happening on European markets. So that kind of information and personnel sharing is incredibly important.
Right. Thank you. I yield back the 3 seconds of my time. Thanks.
Thank you, gentleman yields back. And with that, I will hand the steering wheel back to our esteemed chair.
Just in time for me to yield myself time. Hey, how very exciting. I'll go with Ms. Thornton for just a little bit. Ms. Thornton, you talked a fair amount about how creating this new regulatory regime and duplicative efforts with the SEC might be complicated, troublesome, problematic. What agency today has jurisdiction over fraud and manipulation in commodity spot markets?
That's the CFTC, of course.
Okay, so that's the CFTC. What about who has jurisdiction over derivatives for non-securities, those markets?
The CFTC.
The CFTC. When we look at Bitcoin, have there been any courts that have held that Bitcoin is a security?
No, there's just one decision. No.
Has the SEC ever asserted jurisdiction over Bitcoin?
It should have.
Has the SEC ever asserted jurisdiction over Bitcoin?
I don't believe so.
Do you know what volume of the digital assets trading Bitcoin constitutes?
Roughly 90%. Okay. But there are hundreds of other tokens.
There are. And does the legislate of those hundreds of other tokens that are not generally considered to be commodities, would FIT 21 continue to place the jurisdiction over those other tokens with the SEC?
I think the problem with FIT 21 is it's a way of resolving the jurisdiction between the CFTC and the SEC so that it makes no difference what the SEC thinks, because by the time it weighs in, the tokens are already being traded on the spot market, and the CFTC has to unwind something, and there are hundreds of other tokens.
Ma'am, I don't think that's an accurate description. And in fact, alleging that the creation of this brand new regime is problematic is just not consistent with the facts on the record. What we know now is by your own answers, the CFTC already has a robust role in this arena. And in fact, in the wake of Dodd-Frank, when they were provided grand new authorities to deal with OTC swaps, there were no failures, there were no problems. I think the broad-based assessment by industry is that they did a magnificent job stepping up and filling that gap because it built on their already existing expertise. That is, I mean, they're already doing so much of this. Again, 90% of the volume. I probably would have said 70 or 80, but we can take your assertion at face value. And so I just want to provide greater context around the robust role the CFTC is already playing in commodity spot markets and in digital assets, the overwhelming majority of digital assets. Sir Travis, I'd like to come to you. Travis, we're South Dakotans, so we get to be buddies with one another. But you noted that CFTC reauthorization would really be a vote of confidence. Tell me more what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think, knowing that, whether it's farmers or agribusinesses, knowing that we get to come to the table and talk about changes that need to be made, adjustments that should happen, that is happening from the reauthorization process. I think from our standpoint, I think we're happy with, we're okay with the regulatory environment around what's going on in the markets and the regulations around that. So I think just knowing, giving us the confidence that there's going to be integrity in the marketplace and it's going to be efficient.
Yeah, very good. Mr. Sexton, Mr. Lucan, share your thoughts on this vote of confidence idea. Do the markets really care? Do market participants really care?
There is some uncertainty out there. I mean, I just think the lack of confidence for the CFTC, as Chairman Benham noted, going overseas to his colleagues, knowing that there hasn't been a congressional blessing of the agency in over 15 years. I mean, that is something I think that it would be easy to do for this committee, straightforward to do for this committee, and long overdue.
I would agree that reauthorization recognizes the critical role of the CFTC both domestically as well as internationally, and that's very important for Congress to do.
We have a couple of other members on their way who I know want to ask some questions, so I may exceed my time a little bit here because we want to fill out the record a little. Oh, Mr. Nunn's here. Very good. I have questions about the bankruptcy thing, the issues that you brought up, Mr. Sexton. Mr. Lucan, I think you mentioned it as well. But let's go to Mr. Nunn, and we can always double back.
Well, I want to thank the chair, and I believe strongly here that CFTC does have an important role here, particularly when it comes to those lanes in the road that our industry is asking for, particularly when it comes to digital assets. And I think that CFTC has a better role to play than where the SEC has tried to insert itself. So I'll begin with that. I also want to thank everybody here from the Commodities and Future Trading Commission to ensure that our markets are safe and strong. I know you're each committed to this. Our derivatives markets remain the envy of the world, and that's something we should be very proud of. We should also work to maintain. I want to thank the stakeholders of this committee who have helped our marketplace weather some pretty tough storms in recent years. Our markets are stronger and more resilient, but there's more work to be done to make sure that we don't unintentionally hinder them. With that, I want to move to farmers in my district in Iowa. One of the programs that I think has really worked well here has been this internal whistleblower program that CFTC oversees. The program is crucial for the accountability and protecting of agricultural and financial markets. It also benefits Iowans and all Americans. Just last month, they uncovered a corruption at a company thanks to a whistleblower that resulted in a $55 million fine, meaning that American taxpayers aren't paying for this. We're calling out bad actors, and those bad actors then have to pay for their own policing. As I understand it, a large bulk of the policing comes from the whistleblower program. If we don't act before October 1st, though, this whistleblower program could become defunct due to it not having enough funds to continue. So I introduced, along with Representative Don Davis from North Carolina, a colleague on the other side of the aisle, and my senior senator, Senator Chuck Grassley, H.R. 4935, the CFTC Whistleblower Fund Improvement Act, to permanently address this accounting flaw. Very quickly, I want to ask each member of the panel, do you see yourselves committing to making sure the whistleblower program remains solvent? Could I get a yes, or if there's an equivocation, let me know that.
Yes.
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 It's an important program, but obviously the details would need to be clear before we would have a strong opinion.
Let me ask then, what things would you see needing to be done to make sure the program remains solvent? Ms. Thornton.
Well, I just think one should consider whether it's sustainable as a long-term way to fund enforcement and find enforcement. That's more along the lines of what I'm thinking.
If not for this program, how would we discover more of the bad actors inside? I mean, I think that's the fundamental part where both of us would agree. This is highly important. We don't want to incentivize, folks to have to go out there and police themselves, but we do want to recognize there's got to be a clean pathway for folks to be able to raise their hand and say, the federal government or my agency is not working. I need somebody to come and investigate this.
Yeah, that's certainly a fair question, but I also think that the CFTC needs more funding to carry out its existing duties, one of which is enforcement. So.
Well, I think that bad actors have a responsibility in helping shoulder that far more than the taxpayer, but I hear what you're saying there. Mr. Antonsen, I would like to now turn to capital market formation. I share your concerns about the potential impact here of rules proposed by some unelected bureaucrats in Washington making a lot more red tape for everyday working Americans and farmers. With the average price of one tractor in my home state of Iowa at nearly $500,000, this is a major investment for anyone, whether you're a small farmer or whether you're a beginning farmer, and it directly hurts our ability to grow. Let me ask this. How can we ensure that the CFTC operates in a way that supports the markets while avoiding unnecessary burdensome red tape coming out of Washington?
That's a good question. I mean, we're coming today that we don't really have an ask, right, on CFTC authorization. We feel it's working correctly. I agree with you. As a farmer in South Dakota, I know the economics of that as well. So I think current status quo is okay for regulations on agribusinesses and those trading with farmers to make sure the system works well. I feel we're getting into tougher times. I think the next year or two is going to be even tougher than the past couple of years at the farm gate. So yeah, I agree with you.
As we highlighted with our chairman, my home state, bushel of corn, $3.89. A break-even point is $4.85. Mm-hmm. 3 years ago, we were at over $8 a bushel. America's farmers, farming communities, and the entire country is going to experience a spike in costs if regulation is one of the reasons that it causes an American farmer to have to spend more time filling out paperwork than actually being in the field. I know you know that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I yield the remainder of my time.
Of course, we care about Iowa corn farmers and the prices your folks have, Mr. Nunn, but coming from a state where our yields are 30% less than yours, would you just stop? We're not going to feel bad for you.
Mr. Chair, you have an entire palace to corn.
No, that's
I
true.
appreciate everything you do. Thank you.
I think we're prepared to close the hearing. With that, I would offer the ranking member to make any closing comments she'd have.
Well, thank you again to the witnesses for your testimony. It's really important to hear from you all as we consider this very important reauthorization. And I would like to thank the chair again for his collaborative approach, not just to the way that this subcommittee is run, but in the way that he approaches legislation, and look forward to continuing to collaborate as we look at this very important reauthorization as the CFTC, as we look at the CFTC's need to regulate all commodities, including digital assets.
Yeah, so many of our colleagues, not in this committee, of course, this committee is great, but so many of our other colleagues, they like fighting more than they like governing. And of course, people on this dais actually understand that it's our job to try to govern a country. And of course, our panelists have helped with that today. You've all, to a person, provided, I think, good, specific recommendations for how we can advance. And we're going to take that under advisement, and obviously it'll be an ongoing conversation. It's not just like your 5 minutes under the Klieg lights are the only way that you can feed into this process. So with that, I would note that under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days. It gives us an opportunity to receive additional material and written responses from the witnesses. To the extent any member wants to follow up for the record, the hearing of the Subcommittee on Commodity Markets, Digital Assets, and Rural Development is adjourned.